Okay, let me start. Let me start with saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. My name is Dr. Moustafa Oraby. I'm the Graduate Program Director and also a Professor of Petroleum Engineering at the American University in Cairo. I've been with the industry for almost 25 years. Finally, I need to pay back some part of my experiences to the academia. That's why I joined the American University in Cairo. Okay, today actually I will start talking about the formation evaluation, not from just the tools point of view. We covered this in the previous lectures. So if you need to go and back and refresh your memory on tools and tool responses, and what are the design of each tool, what each tool actually measures. In this case, you need to, I will refer you back to some of the Biopetro and the Arab Oil and Gas Academy database that you can actually go and watch these videos. Today, I will assume that you guys know these logging tools. So how can we combine all these tools to come up with a very quick look well analysis? When I say quick look, because there are actually two different type of analysis, something that we do very quickly, especially if the rig is waiting on our decision. Will we continue completing this zone? This zone is a potential zone or not? How can we define this out with a very quick evaluation? Then we go for complex well analysis that goes back after you go back to the office and you start doing in-depth analysis of the logging data, and also you share this with the geologists, the geophysicists, to come up with a broader understanding of the geological and the structure of your reservoir. That goes for the reservoir characterization and the structure. But for the very quick evaluation of do we really need to complete this zone or not? Is this well in a good place or not? What is a pay zone? How big is the pay zone? How much porosity do I have? This type of things, which is a very quick thing that will help us make a good decision on the rig. Okay. So with that said, let me start with saying basic wireline logging data that we all use. When I say wireline, because we covered here in these webinars and the previous webinars only the wireline logging data. There are also logging while drilling equipment and tools that we can use. They deliver similar measurements with some differences based on the environment that each of these tools actually are run in. So in this case, there are some differences between them. But for the time being, we're talking about the wireline logging. This means the drilling is over. No drilling, it's only the wireline. Using the wireline cable, we acquire certain type of data. Okay, the first one is the borehole caliper. Borehole caliper is the one that we actually use to find out what is the borehole size, what is the diameter of the borehole at every depth. Why do we need to know that? We'll talk about this in a minute. So we have a tool that measures the borehole diameter at every depth. At every measurement we do, one of the measurements is the borehole diameter. We do this with the caliper. Then we run another tool, which is called the gamma ray tool, either total gamma ray tool or a spectral gamma ray tool. It depends on what do you want to do. In this case, we'll go only for the total gamma ray tool, which is the one that measures the total activity or gamma ray activity of the rock that we are facing. This tool is called the gamma ray tool. Okay. So the second tool is most important is the gamma ray. Then we go for the tool that measures porosity, which is the neutron. So this is the third one that we run. So the neutron tool is the tool that measures neutron porosity. Okay. We actually talked about this tool before, and we say that this tool actually measures the hydrogen concentration or hydrogen index or the number of hydrogen atoms. Take it any way you like, just to explain to yourself what this tool is actually reading. Then we go for the rock lithology, which is combining the neutron tool and another tool, which is called the density tool. The density tool gives us the density of the rock that the tool is seeing. When we combine the neutron and the density, we come up with very interesting type of analysis that will help us identify our reservoir. Then the last but not the least is the fluid saturation tool which is actually the resistivity. So this is the box of the tool. These are the basic tools that we measure, that we use. We call this triple combo. Triple combo stands for neutron, density, and the resistivity. Someone will ask, what about the gamma ray and the caliper? We call these are basic tools that they run with every run, regardless of what you do. Okay, when you go into the well bore, it's better to have a caliper with you and to have a gamma ray tool, even if you don't have any other tool but this tool. So we don't really consider this tool as part of the triple combo. We call these are basics required tool that we have to run in every time we descend anything into the well bore. Okay. So combining these tool actually, which is a gamma ray, neutron, density, resistivity, and caliper, what we will measure with this, first of all, the borehole diameter. So we'll talk about the borehole diameter and how we can use this to really find out our reservoir properties. Then we look at the porosity. Porosity is a porous space between the grains of the rock that we have, called this porosity. Then we go for the lithology, and we're combining the density and the neutron tool for lithology. Then we go for the fluids. What type of fluids do we have? Is this water or hydrocarbon? But this is a very important thing. If we don't have hydrocarbon in the zone, there is no need to go and do anything. We don't have to complete this zone. So it will be a waste of money in this case. Okay? Then we go for the fluid situation, as I said, is it water or is it hydrocarbon? Okay? We need to understand that some actually effects of clays, which is a very important thing that every analyst needs to pay attention to. One thing is that the most important is the clay that I see in my rock, is this actually affecting my porosity? Why? Because we know that clays prefer to actually get deposited where the water is. Okay, so all clays actually live in the porous space or between the different layers. Okay, so if the clay lives in the porous space, then it will clog the pores. It will reduce my porosity. We call this, in this case, effective porosity. So effective porosity means the actual porosity that is started. You subtract from this the part that is occupied by the clays. Because as I said, clays actually like to stay in the water, and originally all the pores are filled with water. So at the deposition time, clays actually prefer to be inside the pore space. This is very harmful to our porosity. Let me give you an example of this. Here is a thin section of a core under the microscope. We actually look at this, and let's just enlarge, for example, this window right here. When I enlarge this window, you can see here are the grains, and the one that's blue here is the pore space. If you look at the porosity here, it's very clearly that the porosity here is very, very nice, and I can see it very clean porosity. And this is a good porosity that doesn't have much of clay in it. In the same section, if I go and just take another part, another section, if I go to put this section under the microscope and enlarge it, you can see here is the pore, but the porosity is completely filled with clays, and the clays are really destroying my porosity. And my porosity here, we call it the effective porosity, is actually zero. I don't really have any effective porosity here because all the pores are filled with the clays. There is no room for my hydrocarbon when it migrates. There is no room for my hydrocarbon to live. And that's why we call this really destroying my pore space. And the effective porosity, the porosity that I will produce from, is actually zero in this case. So it is very important to find out how much clay do I have and where does the clay live, okay? And how much harm does this clay is actually causing to my pore space. Okay? All right. Now, when I start looking at evaluation of my reservoir, I look at 3 different stages. And let's just take this stage by stage. Pay attention to this guy. What I have here, I have 4 tools: gamma ray, neutron, resistivity, and density, plus the caliper that I talked about. Using these tools, I have 3 stages I have to go through them, stage by stage. So I will divide the process into 3 stages. The first one is data quality control, which we call it environmental correction. You should not do any type of evaluation of any data that you have unless you do environmental correction. What does it mean by environmental correction? Well, your tools, before they leave the service company and they go to the field, these tools are calibrated to make sure they function properly. But when they calibrated based on API calibration, the American Petroleum Institute calibration procedure. Okay, this calibration is different than the environment that you put the tool in. For example, if you have a mud that has a KCl, you're weighing your mud by KCl, or weighing your mud by bentonite, weighing your mud by barite, whatever. These are not part of the API calibration. Okay? API calibration has a certain procedure and standard. And since you ran your tool in a different environment than the API environment, then you need to do what we call environmental correction. So environmental correction has nothing to do with your reservoir. Has nothing to do with that. I can see always many people confuse between reservoir corrections and environmental correction. Environmental corrections is the borehole fluid correction. What you use to drill the well with, because you can drill your well with oil-based mud. I can drill my well with water-based mud. The other one will drill his well with KCl weighted mud. The other guy will drill his well with barite weighted mud. A third guy will drill his well with some light drilling fluid. So in this case, we all use different environment. That's what we call environmental correction. So what is environmental correction, guys? Don't confuse this with your reservoir. It has nothing to do with your reservoir. Environmental correction is what you did during drilling the well. What fluid you use when you drill the well. What damage you did in your well bore. One of the damage is borehole size. You're supposed to drill 8.5-inch hole, and unfortunately, your reservoir has certain type of properties that you generated at a 10-inch well bore. And it's not actually an 8.5-inch well bore. You need to correct for this. Okay? So that's exactly what the environmental correction is all about. So environmental correction, again, I'm repeating myself. It is the effect of your drilling fluids on the logging tools. It has nothing to do with your reservoir. Am I clear on this? Yeah. The second part is, once you did the environmental corrections to your tools, then you go and calculate the porosity and the lithology in this case. Because now you have the logs in its proper environment, then you can use this corrected logs for calculating the proper porosity and lithology. Once you calculated the porosity and the lithology, then you start calculating fluids, hydrocarbon, and water. So there are 3 steps: environmental corrections, lithology and porosity, then fluids. Okay. Within these 3 major steps, there are minor steps that you need to do. Okay. Let's just start by one by one. Data quality control, which is the environmental correction. The first one to do is borehole size correction, caliper correction, because you intended to drill 12.25 hole. But unfortunately, your drilling was not in a very good shape. Your well bore is not in a very good shape. You deteriorated the well bore. You wanted to drill 8.5-inch hole. Unfortunately, it didn't go very well. Then your hole is not 8.5 inches. It's not a gauged hole. So in this case, you need to do environmental corrections, which is borehole size correction. You need to remove the effect of the extras that you have on the tools. Okay. Second is mud weight correction. Your mud weight is 10.5 ppg. My mud weight is 9. So your mud weight is different than my mud weight. We use the same tool. We use the neutron tool, for example. Let's say Schlumberger neutron tool or Halliburton density tool. It's the same tool, but you put it in a different environment, then your tool will read different than mine. So in this case, I need to remove this effect. That's what we do, the mud weight correction. So mud weight correction, because your mud weight is different than mine. Third is mud salinity correction. For example, you used NaCl, you used sodium chloride, okay? Or your mud salinity is much higher than mine. You used 150,000 ppm mud salinity, and I use 200,000 ppm, or I use 30,000 ppm. So I need to correct for this. because your environment is different than mine. Like the fourth one is the mud additives. For example, do I have barite? Do I have KCl? I have to do these corrections as well. So we corrected for the borehole size, corrected for the mud weight, corrected for the mud salinity, corrected for the mud additives. Okay. Also, we need to correct for temperature. You actually logging a zone at 5,000 feet. According to the temperature gradient, your temperature is say 80 degrees. Okay. And I'm drilling, my reservoir is at 12,000 feet. So my temperature is say 150,000. I'm sorry, 150 degree Fahrenheit. So in this case, your temperature is different than mine. Your pressure is different than mine. So I have to correct for temperature and pressure. So these are the major environmental corrections that we need to apply to make sure that we remove all the environmental effects from my logging data. Then when I use this logging data after the correction, I calculate the proper parameters. Okay, so the borehole correction, mud width correction, mud salinity, mud additives, temperature, and pressure, we need to correct for all of this. We'll show you how we do this in a second. But these are the major steps. Then you go for the porosity and the lithology. First of all, you calculate clay volume. Okay, we'll show how to calculate clay volume. We use the gamma ray to do this. So I use the gamma ray to calculate the clay volume. I use the density to calculate the density porosity. Okay, so I calculate clay volume. I calculate density porosity, means I use the density to calculate porosity. Okay, we'll show you how to do this. We discussed this also in one of the previous seminars when we talked about the density tool. Then we average the neutron and the density, because in our interpretation, and pay attention to this, neither the neutron porosity is correct, neither the density porosity is correct. None of them is correct. The correct value of porosity is the average of both. Okay, so the correct value of your reservoir porosity is not the neutron porosity, and is not the density calculated porosity. It is the average of the neutron density porosity. Sometimes, probably when you go and for training or something, you hear something different instead of the average. They call it the cross plot porosity. Cross plot porosity is exactly what I'm talking about. Cross plot porosity is the average neutron density porosity. Okay, so let's just talk it scientifically instead of we talk about the field language. Scientifically means the right porosity of your reservoir is not the neutron porosity, and it's not the density porosity. It's the average. That's why we calculate the density porosity as a previous step. Then we add it to the neutron and we average both. We get the average neutron density porosity. But this is the total one. I didn't correct for the clay yet. All I did is I calculated the clay volume, but I didn't correct for it yet. So the next step is to use the clay volume and to use the average neutron density porosity, and you get the effective porosity. Effective porosity means you take this total porosity that you calculated from the neutron density and you correct for the effect of the clay volume inside your pore space. I'll show you how to do that. So the next step is, the first step is clay volume, density porosity, neutron density average porosity, effective porosity by correcting for clay. Then you can come up with the lithology, prediction of lithology. And we will stop on this actually for a while, because lithology is a very important thing. I will show you some tricks of how to find out you really are in a sandstone formation, limestone formation, dolomite formation. There are very quick ways of finding this out. So once you ended up with the identification of porosity and lithology, then you go for the fluids. Fluid saturation, you calculate both water saturation and hydrocarbon saturation. Then you start plotting your data. Okay, so this is actually the process as you see here. 3 major steps with minor steps or itemization of steps within every major one. Okay, so let's start with doing this formation evaluation workflow application in a real logging data. Let's just take an example here, real example, and see how we're going to apply this process on. Okay, so the first one is load all your data to a certain software, because you cannot do environmental corrections unless you have a certain software. All softwares that we have in the market, I'm not going to mention names, but if you have a software, and suppose in your school you're supposed to have a software in your computer lab that deals with logging data. So if you do have this, you will find that in every software you use, there is always some way of environmentally correcting the data that you have for every company that runs any tool. So you will see correction for Schlumberger, Halliburton, Baker, Weatherford, whatever the company you're using, you will find correction for. Let's just go for certain. Here is the data. So I have actually certain well here where I have the gamma ray and caliper in the first track. Here is the bit size I used. So I drilled this big hole first, smaller hole, then the smallest one. Here is the actual well bore shape, different than the bit. Bit should be, okay. So here is your actual well bore. Here is the resistivity, and here is the neutron density. So I have gamma ray caliper, I have resistivity, and I have neutron density. This is the shape of my well bore. Okay. If you look at the first hole, this is a 16-inch hole, followed by 12.25-inch hole, followed by 8.5-inch hole. So I have a well here that went to 16-inch, 12.25, and 8.5, and we need to apply the environmental corrections for it. Okay. So once we loaded the data, then we need to find which company actually logged this well, because every company has its own environmental correction. Okay, so we need to find this out, which company ran this log. If you go to the data file or you go to the printout that the company will send to you, the service company will send to you, you know which company actually drilled, which company actually logged this well. Okay, so you know that in this case. Now, if I open the data file here, I will very easily locate the company. Here's the service company, Schlumberger. So from the login data, I can find this out easily. Service company is Schlumberger. Service company, login company is Schlumberger. So now I found out that the company that ran this well, logged it, is a Schlumberger. Okay. Then you need to apply caliper correction, mud correction, all the correction that we talked about here. Let's just start one by one. For example, here is my software I'm using. I'm not going to mention the name of the software, as I said. If I go here for calculation, it goes for a tab here called environmental correction. And when I clicked on environmental correction, it gives me all the companies. Here is Schlumberger, here is Baker, Halliburton, Anadril, Baker. Every company that you will be able to use is actually in the list here. Okay, so this is important. Now we knew that it's Schlumberger, so I have to choose Schlumberger. Okay, when I chose Schlumberger, here is the company, because I knew from the data file that the login company here is Schlumberger. When I started this Schlumberger correction, I have actually here, if I look, I have then a gamma ray, I have density, I have CNL, which is a compensated neutron. I need to correct for these three, one by one. If I go for everyone, for example, let's just go for the gamma ray. Here is my gamma ray. In the gamma ray, he will ask me, first of all, what is your gamma ray input curve? I have to choose my gamma ray input curve. So I have from here, and at this point, I will have to choose from the data I have, my gamma ray input curve. What is the name of gamma ray input curve? It will give me a gamma ray C, gamma ray corrected. So after the correction, it will actually give me a new curve. It's called gamma ray corrected. Corrected for what? For the environmental correction that you have. What are these environmental corrections? It will ask you, what is the caliper curve name? Because the caliper will give you the diameter of the well bore. So you choose the caliper curve. Now, it will ask you, do you need borehole corrections? Yes, I need borehole corrections. So you click on the borehole correction. It will ask you, did you run it centralized tool or eccentric tool? So you tell them it's a centralized or eccentric. So you choose the one that you ran the tool with. What is the mud type? You have barite in the mud type, or you don't have barite in the mud? So did you weight the mud type by barite or not? For example, mine is not barite in it, so I choose no, or I choose barite if I put barite. Okay, is it open hole or it is cased hole? No, it is open hole, so I take the open hole. It will ask you, what is your mud weight that you use? Here is my mud weight. What type of tool, the tool diameter that will be also given to you by the service company. Okay. If in case of cased hole, which is not our case here, then there are other parameters. So you fill in all the information required. Once you hit run, it will run this and give you the new curve. The new curve is called gamma ray C, or gamma ray corrected. Okay, that doesn't mean it will remove the original one. No, it will keep the old one, and it also give you a new one that is corrected for the environmental correction. You do the same for the density, for example. In the density here, it will ask you, what is your density name, curve density name? It will give you rho corrected. So this is the input, this is the output. What is the photoelectric curve that you have? Here is the photoelectric curve, here is the corrected one. What is the caliper curve name? Do you choose the caliper curve name? You need borehole correction? Yes, I need borehole correction. Which tool you use? So as I said, you fill all this information which you know from your database, and you choose this and you get the density correct. You do the same for the neutron again. And the neutron, it will ask you what is the neutron curve name, and it will name it same curve and C. C means corrected. And I do repeat again, it will keep the original one and gives you a new one, which is the corrected one. Then it will ask you, do you need borehole correction, size correction? Do you need mud kick correction? Do you need salinity correction? Whatever the corrections you have. Once you filled all this data, you run it. You run the tab, and then it will give you corrected tab. Once I finished all the correction, it's better actually to draw the original one and the corrected one to see how much correction that really happened. If you remember, our borehole was not really that bad. Okay, the borehole was not very highly washed out. So my expectation that the correction will not do much in this case, because when I plotted the bit size and I plotted my actual borehole shape, it didn't really differ much. It was very small variation. It means the drilling was in a good shape. Okay, so the well was in a good shape. So the expectation is I don't have much correction. Now, if I compare here as I expected, here is my gamma ray, the first track, my gamma ray and my gamma ray corrected. Here is my rho, which is the density and density corrected. Here is my neutron and neutron corrected. Here is my photoelectric and photoelectric corrected. One of them, the original one is black, the corrected one is red, and you can see the black and red are very nicely overlaying, which means that there is not really much of correction, which I expected to happen because my well bore shape was not in a very bad shape. Okay, so that's why the corrections were in a good shape. Right? So the first step is you need to make sure you apply the environmental correction on all the data that you get from the service company logging your well. Okay? The second step is visual lithology. I need you guys to pay attention to this because this is something that I want you to gain that experience of how can I, by looking at the data, I can tell you this reservoir is sandstone, or this reservoir is limestone, or this reservoir is dolomite. I can tell you this. This section is limestone. This section is sandstone. And you need to build this skill. Okay? You're not going to be able to build this skill unless you really understand how the tools work. Okay? Because every tool will respond to lithology in a different way. Okay? For example, we all know wherever you work, if you work here in Far East or in North Africa and in the US, we all have what we call the stratigraphic column. We know the stratigraphic column. Stratigraphic column actually changes. For example, I'm showing here one of the stratigraphic columns in Egypt, which is very complicated. That's why I showed this to you, because it has a lot of features here. For example, I have anhydrite, I have halite, which is salt, I have limestone, I have sand, I have dolomite. So I have so many of them. How the log will react to this, and how by looking at the log, I can tell you the log is seeing anhydrite. The log is seeing halite, which is the salt. The log is seeing sandstone. The log is seeing limestone. So in this case, I need to build this skill. So let's just take it a step by step. Let's assume that I have a certain sequence here. The top one is clay, followed by anhydrite, followed by salt, followed by clay, followed by sand, followed by anhydrite, followed by lime, followed by dolomite, clay, and it's a very complicated stratigraphic column, similar to what I just showed you in the Gulf of Suez in Egypt. I can actually predict before even I put the tools inside my well bore. I can predict how the tool will react if it sees any of these rocks. Okay, so let's go one by one. In the first track, I will actually divide it from 0 to 150, and this is my gamma ray track. What's my expectation when the gamma ray sees a clay zone? When the gamma ray sees a clay zone, clay has potassium, thorium, and uranium, or potassium, thorium, probably some of the uranium, and it will see a very high gamma ray activity. So that's why potassium is radioactive, thorium is radioactive. So from the potassium and the thorium, the radioactivity will show high gamma ray reading. Okay, but followed by what? Followed by anhydrite. Does the anhydrite actually have any potassium in it, in the structure? It's an iron sulfate. It doesn't have any potassium. Okay, does it have any thorium in it? No, it doesn't have any thorium in it. So if there is no potassium or thorium in any rock, will the rock actually read high gamma ray? No. So it actually requires me knowing what type of rock I'm dealing with. If you follow the salt, what is salt? Salt is sodium chloride, NaCl. Does it have potassium? No. Does it have thorium in the structure? No. So if it doesn't have potassium or thorium, what's your expectation of the gamma ray? It should not read high gamma ray. It should read low gamma ray. So by knowing the rock, I can predict what the tool would see. Then when it goes to clay, it will read high gamma ray again. How about the sandstone? It depends. If the sandstone is clean, it will read very low. Clean means it doesn't have any clay component. But if the sand is shaly sand, it has high clay component, it will read high gamma ray, but it's not very high gamma ray like the clay. It will read higher gamma ray. Okay, so I will see gamma ray reading a little bit high, but it's not as high as the clay, because clay is 100% of radioactivity coming from the clay. So my expectation in this case go this way. Clay will read high, and the anhydrite and the salt, it will read low. When it goes back to clay, it should read high. In the sandstone, it depends now, high or low, depends on how much you have. When it goes into anhydrite, it has to read very low. Limestone can be high or low, depends, does it have clay or not. Dolomite, high or low, doesn't matter. Clay, it goes back to high. Anhydrite has to go back to low. So these are the expectations I have for the gamma ray. Now, what are the expectations for the neutron and the density? Let's just draw the neutron and the density. First, I will just go for the neutron. Neutron will go from 45 to -15 as we agreed before. And there is a zero, here is the zero porosity here. Okay? So this is -15, here is the zero porosity. Why am I putting the zero porosity? Because we need to go and find out what is the reading of the neutron will be. If the neutron actually passes in front of a clay zone, will it read porosity or not? Let's just go back and find out. The neutron tool measures the hydrogen component. Forget about the porosity. The neutron is measuring hydrogen component. Does the clay have hydrogen? Yes, because clay has H2O and clays have OH. Okay, so clays have H2O and we have OH, both have hydrogen. That's why in front of the clay, the neutron tool will read very high. Why? Because the neutron tool responds to hydrogen, and clays, they have a lot of hydrogen. Okay? How about the anhydrite? Is there any hydrogen in the anhydrite composition? No. Iron sulfate doesn't have any hydrogen in it. Okay? How about the salt? Well, in NaCl, there is no hydrogen. So in front of the anhydrite and in front of the salt, the neutron tool should read very close to zero. Okay, so it should not read any porosity whatsoever. So my expectation that if it hits the salt or it hits the anhydrite, it should read zero because there is no hydrogen in there. Remember, neutron tool responds to hydrogen. As an engineer, but you need to think like an engineer. As an engineer, you need to find out, does this mineral have hydrogen? No or yes. If it has hydrogen, neutron tool will read porosity. If it doesn't, neutron tool will read zero. Very simple. Okay? Now, if it goes back to clay, it will read high. How about the sandstone? It depends on the porosity. If it has 5% porosity, it will read less porosity. If it has 25% porosity, it will read high porosity. So in sandstone, it depends on the porosity. However, if it goes back to anhydrite, anhydrite doesn't have any hydrogen. And this has to read 0. How about the limestone? Again, it depends on porosity. How about the dolomite? It depends on porosity. How about the clay? It reads very high. How about the anhydrite? It reads very low. It has to read 0. So my expectation is, here is the neutron tool. It will read high porosity. Here is the 45. It will read high porosity in front of clays. When it goes to anhydrite and salt, it will read 0. Okay, no hydrogen in there. It will read, now it goes to the clay again here. It will read high porosity. Goes to sandstone, it can read high. It depends on how much porosity you have. But once it sees the anhydrite, it goes back to 0. Why? Anhydrite doesn't have any porosity. Limestone, it will read high porosity. Dolomite, it will read, it depends on the porosity. Very high porosity in front of clay, drops down to 0 in front of anhydrite. I hope that you guys understand now how these things are related to each other. Okay. How about the density? Density will do the same. Okay, we'll go for density 2.95 to 1.95, and it will go this way. What is the density of clays? Yeah, density of clays 2.6, 2.7. So it will read something similar to this density. How about the density of anhydrite? Very heavy. Anhydrite has a very high, this 2.98. So that's why it goes all the way to the right, 2.95 here, and exceeded. How about the salt? Salt is about 2.1. So it goes back to 2.1, okay, close to 2.1, and so on. So knowing the understanding of what each tool will respond to, I can predict what the tool will be responding. From this point on, what I want you to get out of this comparison or this analysis I'm doing here is one thing. First of all, if I see the neutron, look at this and keep this in your mind. If I see the neutron going to the left and I see the density going to the right with a separation, that's exactly a clay zone. So the clay zone has two properties. The first one, the gamma ray is high. Second one is neutron and density are separating, where neutron is in the left and density is going to the right. Once I see the neutron to the left, density to the right, and the gamma ray is high, you can stamp on this zone. It's a clay zone. Okay? Now, go to the sand. Sand is opposite of the clay. Look at this. Clay was neutron to the left and density to the right. When it's actually opposite, where the density is to the left and the neutron to the right, gamma ray is not very high like the clay. That's a sandstone response. So again, what is the sandstone response? Neutron density to the left, neutron to the right. Again, density left, neutron right. That's a sandstone. If it's actually neutron left and density right, that's a clay. Okay. Now, if I go here, they are overlaying, no separation. That's a limestone. If the neutron and the density are not separated, it's a limestone. So when the neutron and the density are overlaying, you can stamp there. That's a limestone. When they separate, similar to the clay. Look at the clay. Clay, neutron left and density right. Here is neutron left and density right. It's dolomite. Say, oh, how can I differentiate it then? If the clay is the same as dolomite, say, no. Clay has another thing. Gamma ray is high. But dolomite, no, gamma ray should not be that high because it's a reservoir. Okay. So when I see gamma ray is low and the separation is similar to the clay separation, that's a dolomite. Okay, guys, and probably this is the first time to hear this, but I would want you to at least, if you get out of this webinar with this understanding, look at this. When gamma ray is high, okay, and neutron to the left, density to the right, that's a clay signature. When the gamma ray is low and the opposite happens, density to the left, neutron to the right, that's a sandstone signature. When gamma ray is low and the neutron and the density are overlaying, that's a limestone signature. Okay. When the density is on the neutron is left Density is right, similar to the clay, but the gamma ray is low. That's a dolomite signature. I hope this is actually clear to everyone. Let me apply this to this example. I have neutron and I have density here. Okay, everybody can see that. I have neutron and I have density. Look at this. Here is my neutron to the left, density to the right. How can I identify the clays? I said high gamma ray first, then neutron left and density right. This is the signature. Let's look at the ray here. Gamma ray is high. Here is high gamma ray. Is the neutron left? Yes, the neutron is left. Is the density right? Yes, the density is right. So this zone has to be a clay zone. How about this one? Gamma ray is high. Look at this. And if I go there, neutron is left. Density is, neutron always is blue. Neutron is left. Density is right. Then this is a clay zone. If I go to this peak, high gamma ray. If I go there, neutron is left. Density is right. So this is a clay zone. Again, high gamma ray, very high gamma ray. Then I can actually say all these zones are clay zones. Here is a clay zone, 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 and so on. So the clay zones, they have high gamma ray, they have neutron left and density right. Okay? Resistivity has to be low as well. Why? Because all these clays are very conductive. So resistivity is low, resistivity is low, resistivity is low. And it's just a confirmation. I always confirm this with my eyes that these are clay zones. Okay. Now, the non-clay zone, we said gamma ray has to be low, lower than the clays. Now, if the neutron is right and the density is left opposite to the clay, we call this what? We call this sandy zone. Let's just look at this. Here is a lower gamma ray compared to the clay. Here is the clay zone. Here is a lower gamma ray zone. Here is the opposite. Look at this. Neutron here was left. Density is right. He is actually changed. The density is left and the neutron is right. So I actually know for sure that this zone is sandstone. Okay. Similarly, this zone is sandstone. This zone is sandstone, and so on. So I can actually say this. The neutron here is sandstone. If the overlay, it's limestone. If they actually have the same separation like the clay, it's dolomite. So applying these rules, this reservoir is absolutely a sandstone reservoir. So by visualization, I knew this reservoir is a sandstone reservoir. Okay, everybody understand that? It's very, very important to train your eyes. I'm not sure if you guys study this at your universities or not, but we teach this at the American University here. We actually get the students to pick all these zones by their visualization before even using the software. So you get trained on how to identify the different lithology from the actual logging data. Okay. How can I calculate the clay volume and the porosity? To calculate the clay volume, first of all, we need to identify what is the minimum clay reading in my reservoir. You go there and search for the minimum clay reading. Here is my minimum clay reading. I decide what is your minimum clay reading. Also, go and find the maximum clay reading. So you put your gamma ray between minimum and maximum. Okay. Once you define the minimum and you find the maximum, then you calculate the clay volume from the very well-known linear clay correlation, gamma ray minus gamma ray clean divided by gamma ray shale minus gamma ray clean, or we can call it gamma ray minus gamma ray minimum divided by gamma ray maximum minus gamma ray minimum. You apply this on the entire well, then you calculate the clay volume. So how can I calculate the clay volume? First of all, you look at the logs, you decide what is the minimum reading of gamma ray and what is the maximum reading of gamma ray. The minimum reading of gamma ray, we call it gamma ray clean. Maximum reading of gamma ray, we call it gamma ray shale. Okay? Then you start using these two values to calculate the clay volume. Okay? Once you calculate the clay volume, you plot it from 0 to 1. 1 is 100%, 0 is a 0%. Now, I calculated this, and here is my V clay. I calculated my V clay here as using the equation gamma ray minus gamma ray minimum divided by gamma ray maximum minus gamma ray. Okay. Now we need to shade the clay. So now shaded the clay here. So and now I know exactly my clay volume, where and how much do I have at every foot. Okay? Once you calculated the clay volume, then we need to calculate porosity. We said to calculate porosity first, you calculate density porosity. Then you calculate the average neutron density porosity. Okay? Remember this, very, very important. How can I calculate the density porosity? Easy. Your raw bulk, the density that you calculated minus 2.71 divided by 1 minus 2.71. Don't change the 2.71 because somebody will say, you just told us that it's sandstone and sandstone is 2.65. So this is true. But remember, your neutron porosity is on limestone. You cannot put the neutron porosity on limestone and you calculate the density porosity on a sandstone. That's not that's a what we call it a bias. That should not do that. But since your neutron is in limestone, then your density porosity has to be also on limestone for consistency. Okay? Okay. The average will take the all this ambiguity out. That's why we average both. Neither the neutron is correct, neither the density is correct. The average neutron density is the correct. Okay? So you calculate the average by adding the phi neutron plus phi density divided by 2. Okay? So the phi density, guys, you have to use the 2.71. Despite that we just identified that the rock is sandstone. That doesn't matter. You still use the limestone density because your neutron is on limestone scale. Somebody will say, well, in my country, we don't use limestone scale, we use sandstone scale. So in this case, you use 2.65. If your neutron is on limestone scale, use 2.71. If your neutron is on sandstone scale, sometimes in the US, for example, we use sandstone scale 1.65, 2.65. So in this case, you have to calculate density porosity on sandstone scale. Okay? Then you take an average neutron density porosity. Okay? Now, once you calculated the average neutron density porosity, you need to correct it for the clay. How can I correct it for the clay? We call it effective. It's actually the neutron density average minus V clay times phi 100% clay. What's a phi 100% clay? It is the reading of the clay of the neutron density in front of the 100% clay. Look at your log, you go back to your logs again, and you look at the high gamma ray zone, which is 100% clay, and read the neutron and density porosity there. So this is what we call the 100% clay point. So the phi neutron density minus clay volume that you just calculated, multiplied by the porosity of 100% clay. You have a zone in your log. It's a 100% clay zone that you identify, okay, which is the zone that has the maximum gamma ray reading. Look at the neutron density there and read the value. This is the value of the 100% clay point. Once you do this, then you calculate. So this is actually read the neutron density porosity in front of the 100% clay volume. This is the value there. So you calculated the neutron density porosity already. You calculated the V clay, and you find this from the log. You go to the maximum value of gamma ray and read the neutron density in front of it. So this is the reading of the neutron density in front of the 100% clay. And you do the calculation to calculate the effective porosity. Then you plot it. So here is my effective porosity. Okay? My expectation is in front of a very high gamma ray, I don't have really effective porosity. My clay is hurting my porosity. It's actually going back to 0. Okay? If I look at this, here a very high gamma ray streak. What happened to my porosity? Destroyed, 0. Here is a high gamma ray streak. What happened to my porosity? 0. Here is 100% clay. What happened to my porosity? 0. Okay, so once I have this, it's clear now in front of 100% clay, my reading, it has to be 0. Very, very low effective porosity. Okay, right. Then here is my clay volume. Here is my porosity. So what is the rest? The rest is my lithology, my rock. And we identified the rock as sand. Okay, we said that this zone is sandstone. We just looked at this. This is a sandstone zone. Now we can actually look at it as a sandstone. Then your lithology is a sandstone. So I know now here is my clay volume, my lithology is sandstone, and here is my porosity. So I calculated my effective porosity, I calculated my clay volume, and I knew my reservoir is sandstone. So I actually came up with that very interesting picture of a very quick analysis. I did not calculate how much water or how much hydrocarbon yet. So that's the next step. What's left is how much water and how much hydrocarbon do I have in my pore space. SW and SH is hydrocarbon. For simplicity, use RC in this case, because this is, remember, this is a quick look. When you go back to the office, if RC is too simplistic for this reservoir, use a different model. But at least for the quick look, you can calculate RC very straightforward. RC here, I have to know what is RW, I have to know what's A, M, and N. For sure, in your reservoir, these parameters are known. Once you know these parameters and you calculated your porosity, you measured your resistivity, then you can easily calculate the SW. Once you calculated the SW, if you multiply your SW times the porosity, it gives you the part of the pores that actually contains water. Here is SW, assume SW is 40%, and you have 10 PU. This means that 4 PU are filled with water and 6 PU are filled with hydrocarbon. Okay, that's what 40% means. 40% water saturation means out of the 10 PU that you have, 4 PU are filled with water and 6 PU are filled with hydrocarbon. So you multiply SW by the porosity, gives you the volume of the pore space that's actually filled with water. And you put this and you draw this and you color it as blue, because blue in our coloring means water. So this is blue. How about the rest? If this part is blue, which is water, then the rest will be the hydrocarbon, which we put it as green. So my hydrocarbon will be as. So as you can see here, I calculated my hydrocarbon volume and I calculated my water volume with a very, very quick way of calculation. It's not really very difficult. It's very straightforward. Okay, calculating your clay volume, calculating your effective porosity, and then you calculate your hydrocarbon saturation very quickly. You can do that on the rig if you actually visit the rigs. You can go and do this on the rig, and you can make a decision which zone I need to perforate, which zone I need to complete, or this well doesn't have any potential. So you can actually have this quick look in your mind by doing very, very simple calculation until you go back to the office, and then you start doing more complex analysis that fits your reservoir modeling as you do in the company that inshallah you would be working for. So in summary, to have a quick look well evaluation, then what you do to perform the following: you do environmentally corrected logs, then you do quick log visual lithology determination, then you do clay volume calculations, then you go for density porosity calculation, then you go for neutron density average porosity calculation, then you correct to go for effective porosity, clay corrected neutron density with effective porosity, then you calculate the water saturation using Mr. Archie, then you end up with knowing which zone has the potential of being a producing zone or not. Thank you very much. Actually, hope that you guys learned something from this webinar, and I'll be very happy to entertain some of the questions if you have.
Dr. Moustafa, thank you very much for the amazing webinar as usual. I have a few questions for you. The first question, can we rely on the measurement of the density log in the casing section?
In the cased section, he means?
It seems like he's asking about cased hole logging.
Okay. No, there is no measurement of density in casing. Okay. What we actually covered here is open hole analysis. Cased hole, we have neutron through casing, but we do not have density through casing. Quite frankly, when I was with Halliburton before, there was big project on trying to find a tool that can measure density behind casing. I don't think it was successful, and I don't think there's any company that can do that. It's very complicated as is in neutrons, very complicated as is even in the gamma ray corrections. So having a density measurement that has very, very high sensitivity to any type of variation in the wellbore. If you put the casing and you put the cement, it will add much more difficulty for the density. Up to my knowledge, there is no density through casing anyway.
A second question about Gulf of Suez in Egypt. To what extent the geologic column of Gulf of Suez is valid? Also, is it different from another area in Egypt?
Absolutely. Gulf of Suez is one of the most complicated you will ever face if you work in the Gulf of Suez. It's really very complicated. It's different than the Eastern desert, different than the Western desert, completely different. If you can find your way in the Gulf of Suez, believe me or not, you would be an excellent petrophysicist, because the challenges there are very high. Challenges in drilling, challenges in evaluation, lots of faults, lots of anhydrite, lots of salt sections, which is a halite, very highly interbedded, very thin layers. Things are. When things happen crossing the Red Sea, I think it's caused a lot of issues in the Red Sea structure. So the Red Sea is a very complicated one. Yes.
Fatima is asking about if we have a sandstone formation, how we know if it has water or hydrocarbon.
If you have a sandstone formation, how we know it has water? We just covered that at the very end. Once you calculated your effective porosity, then all you need to do is to use Archie as a simplistic way. First, use Archie, calculate Archie SW, multiply, and see what the SW is. If the SW above 70%, 80%, that's bad luck. If the SW 20, 30, 40%, then you still have a reservoir.
Another question, are PE log and PEF are the same?
What's the EE log?
PE log.
Oh, PE.
And the second one
yeah.
is
actually it's the same.
PEF.
Some companies call it PE. Yes, some companies call it PE, photoelectric, and some company call it PEF, photoelectric factor. It's the same thing.
It is the same.
It is the same thing. It's just a different naming, but it is essentially the same thing, which is Z over 10 to the power 3.6, which is this is what the PE is. So the F it stands for factor. Some companies they call it photoelectric. Some companies call it photoelectric factor, but they both are the same.
Another question: do we use Archie equation for carbonate too?
You remember when I started talking about this webinar, I said this is quick look, something that you will actually need an answer now. Okay. If I need an answer now, I don't have a problem doing some approximations. Okay, even if you don't know what A, M, and N is, go for 1, 2, 2. Okay, so you can have a very quick one. Now, if this quick one gave me SW as a 10%, for example, well, probably the exact one will make it 20. So it's not going to make a big difference. So it's not going to change from being a hydrocarbon zone to a water zone. Okay, so that approximation is not going to do this. But if the SW came as 90%, well, it will never be 10% if you apply the exact equation. It will be still 80%, 75%, still a wet zone. Okay. So my point is, if you go for Archie as a quick look analysis, quick look, and I stressed on this at the beginning, this is a quick look, a decision I need to do now. I don't have enough time to leave the rig there that's costing me $100,000 per day for someone to go and wake up and wash his face and sit in front of a computer and take his time to do the analysis, and I'm paying money on the rig. No, I need somebody to make a decision now to make sure, do I let the rig release, or I need to stay and complete the well. Then at this time, I can use Archie. Once you're done with this, you made your decision. When you go back to your office, then do whatever sophisticated for you. I agree with you, Archie is not the most suitable for carbonate, but as a quick look, it is okay for carbonate as a quick look.
Another question, is it possible to have mechanical errors in the logging tool, and how we can find out that?
Mechanical one?
mechanical errors.
What do you mean by mechanical errors? Mean mechanical tool errors?
Yeah, it seems like something wrong with the equipment itself.
Oh yeah, for sure. But the field engineer will find this out. And also I'm not sure what mechanical means by mechanical. But yeah, it's easy, and any trained engineer will be able to find if there is anything in the connectivity between tools. It's not clear what the question is, but anyway, if this is what he means, a very well-trained engineer will be able to find this out for sure.
The last question, is it possible to have the slides?
Unfortunately, no, but you'll have the webinar. You can watch it as much as you want.
Okay, Dr. Moustafa, thank you very much, and please enjoy your rest of the day. If you have any rest of the day, I believe you have evening now, so enjoy your evening.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it, Dr. Garhi, and looking forward to seeing you guys somewhere in this world. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.